Let's work on our properties and make them finalized. Hello everyone, this is Andy Reza. Welcome to the Mentor Code Lab. In few episodes back, I told you that I want to merge the block properties and block properties BE. And I started by having a mock-up code to see what we have and what we want to have. And I noticed something. Before even merging them, you see that I'm not consistent on the namings. For example, has horizontal facing, has lit properties, then we have should comparator output, and then set should tick, set right click to open GUI, set drop contents on break. Now these doesn't make sense at all. Okay, I prefer to have something like this. First of all, as you see, all of them starts with add. Add horizontal facing, add lit property, add comparator output. And then instead of having a block properties class for the block entity, we will have add block entity and we will introduce the type directly in this method. And the rest are again method calls that we will have on the block properties like tick, right click should open GUI, drop contents on break. This is one of the things that we will work today. The other thing is the block entity properties. Now, this needs to be changed because right now in Jiralib, we have problem with many different types of block entities. I prefer to have as minimum as possible and handle everything there. And honestly, adding these on top of each other made a huge problem because if you look, the synced BE is using isync tick, and isync tick is just having tick method and tick client, and the tick method is just checking if we are implementing updatable or not. However, the synced BE is actually extending the updatable BE. So yes, we are. However, it's not as clean as possible. And if you compare the synced BE to tickable BE, you see that we have the same code for the tick method, but on different method names. And this becomes more and more confusing. And honestly, when we dive into this system, we will see that we can have one single block entity class that will handle everything for us, except maybe the screen one, because the screen needs to have this IBE screen, and even that can be handled directly inside. However, I prefer to have one that is not a screen BE and one for the screen BE. So basically, we will merge all these three and we will merge these three. And because of that, we need to change how the block entity properties is working. And we will have a method called .update, makes the block entity updatable. Then we will have the tick logic as we already have, and this will add the tickable, and the tick logic at the same time. And then we mark the block entity to be synced. So we will start working with the properties because without these, we can't go on and move toward Jiralib. And you notice that our properties are sitting inside JiBase now. To work on these, I prefer to have a new class, or maybe I will change these names to be the temp. So I will actually, I'm not sure if I can rename these. Let me do this. I will create a Java class and call it temp. Okay, now this temp will be the combination of block properties and block properties BE. So I will keep the block properties in the second monitor, and I will start copy pasting code from that into our temp. So we have a bunch of parameters. That's okay. Let's just add them. And then we have some get and set methods and some helper methods. Okay, let's take a look. These are internal, so I don't care about them. However, for the get, we have this block properties BE. We don't want that, okay? So that will be gone. Now, take a look at this. I'm instantiating the comparator output in line, same with shape factory and few other things. I will prefer to have a constructor. Now, originally, our block entity didn't have a constructor, so doesn't harm anyone. If you want to have a constructor that accepts nothing actually, not even this, and starts adding variables. So for example, this will happen in the constructor, and here we can remove that part, okay? And this video will be a lot of code refactoring. So if you are happy with what you have, or if you just want to look at the finished code, then you can completely ignore this until much later that I will go deep inside the use case, and you can skip forward as much as you want. However, I highly recommend that you watch it because at some point we will encounter a problem that we had seen before, and that is using generics for the block entity part. Now you may ask, why am I moving these stuff into the constructor? Normally, it's not a good practice to have things inline initialized. However, in modding community and in modding scenarios, some things are exception. For example, the keys and the registry keys that you define here and there in your mod, it's better to have them inline initialized. For example, this one, the cache directional shapes. It's inline initialized because it's final. So although it is being instantiated inside the constructor, so it shouldn't have a problem when I remove this part. There we go. Now, we have a constructor that we didn't have before. However, we have this guy, and I want to have it in the same folder. So before going into the methods, I want to move the parameters into the temp and see what we have. So we have a supplier of block entity type supplier, and from here on, our problem will start. We don't recognize this T. What is the T? The T is a generic that we need to introduce to the system on top. So T extends block entity. Having it here means that now this will work. However, as you see, it's private final. So again, we have to assign it in the constructor. But take a look. Now we have this block entity supplier. The reason is that now we need a parameter in the constructor, and that is supplier of block entity. Now this changed things a lot. If I go back to my test and I will say that new temp, okay, now you see that here I have a problem, not with the generic, but with this parenthesis. The problem is that here I need to introduce a block entity type. I can go with null and it will work, or like the scenario above, I can use it here. And this will tell the system that this is my block entity, okay? And instead of adding block entity, now I have it in the constructor. So if I'm sending anything other than null, I'm actually marking the same thing to be acceptable as having a block entity. Now let's take a look at the parameters here. So this can be null, don't forget that. Then we have the should tick. Again, I will move this into the constructor. Then we have the block entity factory and the tick factory. Again, I moved these into the constructor. So instead of inline initialization, we have them there. Now, if we want to, we may have a multi-block system. So I will add the comment here. And then two booleans that again, we will instantiate in the constructor. Okay, now let's see what we are lacking here. Actually, I think we are good. If we take a look at our example, these were coming from block entity. That's okay. Then the tick is just setting the should tick actually. Right click and drop content. Yes, that's the whole thing. Okay, that's our constructor. However, after the constructor, now we want some things that will return generics. Let's start with the getter of the block property first. So I will have a region that says getters, and I will have a region that says setters. Inside each one of them, I will have two more regions. One is the block and one will be the block entity. And I will have the same structure inside the setters. Okay, now I can close the setters and it will close everything, and I can focus on the getters for the block properties. Now here I will have some name changes. One of the things that we want is the facing opposite. So it is called facing opposite that returns the place facing opposite. I will call is facing opposite. Anything that will start with is means that it will return the value, okay? Then we have the has comparator output. Now, if I use is, it will be meaningless. However, I can use this. Has facing opposite. Then we have the comparator output, and here we will call get comparator output. Then we have render type, and again we will use get at the start. Let's go with the get facing opposite, get comparator output. Oh, no, I can't do that. Okay, then we have shape factory, and again we will use get at the start. State properties, we will use get. Then we have can exist at, and the cached directional shapes. So I will put it there, and again I will add another get at the start of this method. So those are the getters for the block. Instead of going into the block entity, I will work with the set of the block, because here we will have changing names a lot. Instead of has, now we'll add the horizontal facing, okay? And I'm just copy pasting the whole methods from before, because right now I'm just doing massive refactor. And you notice something, I'm returning block properties. This will not work, and you will see it in a few minutes. However, knowing that we are working with the block properties BE, and it has the generic section, we want to mimic this block properties BE that returns the generic. So I will copy the generic section, and each time I see that I'm returning the block properties, I will add the generic section on front. Okay, now what is the problem? And oh, okay, this is called temp, and it will solve that problem. If I remove the generic, you see that we have a warning here. Okay, then I need to make sure that at no place I'm using block properties name. So Control C, Control F, Control V, paste, and it's 0. Okay. Then we have another one that is again temp of T, default direction. Now I will set the default direction, and remember we changed the name, so this will be add horizontal facing. Then we go with, first of all, change this one to temp of T, and this one will be add facing, and again this one will be add facing. So instead of focusing on the temp T first, I will focus on the names. This will be add. Again, we will have add here on both cases, add, and then add access property. And let me see what is wrong here. Return this. Yes, that this problem will exist because we are returning something different here. Okay, then we have the set default access. So set default access. This one will be add enabled properties, add, and the next one is the default enabled. That will be set default enabled. Now here is the thing. We have these add facing, add access, add default, but we are not having a get method for them. The reason is that they will sit on the state. If you want to, and I may do it maybe behind the scenes, is adding those getters here. So for example, we say has horizontal facing, and then we will check if the state has the horizontal facing, because right now we are putting this that the state properties at horizontal facing. Then we can say state properties dot get horizontal facing or has horizontal facing or something like that. Okay, contains property blah. It depends on what we have here. I totally forgot on the methods. Let's see, where are we? Okay, state properties. Let's see what we have. Get properties, contains property. Yeah, we can use that to get a Boolean flag as if we have the flag or not set, or the attribute and properties are set on the objects or not. So those get methods will be added behind the scenes, not in front of the recording camera. Then the next one, add locked properties, add, and you see that these Boolean values I have has horizontal facing, I will change them to the flag as the name, okay? Because honestly, that's meaningless. Just have a Boolean flag, you know? If the flag, then add that. And it can happen all over the place when we have Booleans. But again, that's something that I will do behind the camera. Okay, when I paused the video, I completely finished this class because honestly, it was more copy pasting than anything else. And I want to show you the final result. As you see, the block compartments for the temp file now has changed the names for adding, getting, and has. Also, I did add some more getters for has enabled property, has locked, because I do want to have those Booleans. And as I said, I would add them behind the scenes, and I did. And when it comes to the setting section, it's the finished product with adding and setting. Now, I did change the names to be the flag for the parameters on the Booleans, and I did change it here for set. So we add or we set, and we set the default values. And other than that, nothing really changed. Although here again, I changed the name to set empty shape, set constant shape, set shape factory, add rotated shapes, and can exist at. With this, the block section is done. Then I went into the block property section, and again, it was copy pasting and just renaming. So get BE type supplier, get BE type is tickable, get BE factory, get BE ticker, has GUI and has inventory. Now you see that the right click to open GUI will be set using the has GUI, and drop contents on break will be set using inventory name. Although these are the getters, now on the setter side, as you see, we have the tick, and then add GUI, and then add inventory. However, as you notice, I may send in null here, and we will take a look at those examples in a few minutes. So chances are that block entity type supplier can be null. If this is null, then we can't use the get method. So we need to check if we are not null. Also, there is a chance that we send a supplier that returns null. So we need to check that the get that calls the supplier will not return null. If those cases are met, so we have provided a proper type supplier, then we set these. If any one of these two fail, then we didn't have a blocked entity. So the entity factory and the ticker will be null. Keep in mind that in future, when we want to refactor the G block, we need to be aware of these nulls. So that's one of them. Then when I'm setting the tick or GUI or inventory, again, we need to check those two null conditions, but here instead of having and, we go with or, and we are not negating it. So if the supplier is null or if the get returns null, then we throw an illegal argument exception saying that, hey, if you want a tick on a block entity, the supplier can't be null. And this happens in both cases for the tick, in both cases for the GUI, and in both cases for the inventory that returns the flag for, drop contents on break. Now that we finished this, our test will look something like this. We can say that, hey, add horizontal facing, add lit property, add comparator output, add empty shape maybe, and then add invisible renderer, add waterloggable property, facing the opposite direction, and tick, add GUI, and add inventory. Now this is where we are producing a block entity. When we are not producing a block entity, we have two different ways of saying that we don't have a block entity. One is to provide a supplier that returns null for the type. Again, we can't have the inventory, GUI, or tick, but the block section will work. The other way to do that is just by sending null as the supplier itself, and we are handling it properly. So you can see that from this original shape, we went into the desired shape of the whole thing, and now we are sure that our block properties are shaped the way we want. Now that we have it, the only thing remaining is that I will copy this name and I will delete these two files. Then I will go into temp, and on top, I will select the temp alone. I will hit Control F, or what was that? Edit, find, replace, Control R. Okay, so Control R, and here I paste block properties. So each time I find a temp, I will replace it with block properties. Alternatively, instead of hitting replace, we can go with replace all, but I want to make sure that I'm doing it properly, and it should be, because temp is something really special here. Finally, I need to talk about these. Now, these came from the block property section. However, they had their own generic, and the generic was called T extends comparable T. Because now we are using T for the temp, these were changed to be U, and as you see, every one of them that had T extends enum T, now it's U extends enum U, and here class U, U default value, and list of U. So anything that was T before now is U. Okay, one thing at top. Let's rename the file itself to be the block properties refactor. And now the error is gone. And now, instead of having two files, we ended up with a single file for block properties. Now, block entities, BE properties is actually correct, other than one thing that I don't like here, and we need to add stuff on top of it. I will talk about it right now, but I will not implement it because it needs its own video, especially when we are dealing with the block entities later in Jiralib at the same time. So I don't need temp here, and this is the temp base. We don't need that anymore. These were just example codes that would make things work. Okay. Now let's see that we have a block entity, and doesn't matter which version of block entity or children it's extending from. We only have a BE properties of the block entity called properties. Either inline or in the constructor we initialize it. Then we want to call methods on top. Well, guess what? We don't want to call the tick. We don't need to call the tick because we have a call for the tick logic, and it's here. You see that it asks for an instance of tick logic, itick logic called tick logic, and it will assign it there. Now, this is a set, but then when we go for checking if it is tickable or not, we don't have that method. So if I come back, you see that I don't have the update method. I have the sync method, so why don't I have the update method? We need to add that one. Also, this dot properties dot is syncable, we have that one. dot is updatable. We will have that one. And one last thing, dot is tickable. We don't have it, although actually we have it. Where is that? I don't know, cannot find. Okay, so let me get that one on top, because the very first error will cause the compiler to stop following the next error. So we don't have the is tickable, we don't have the updatable, we don't have a method to set the update, but we don't need a method to set the tickable, because if we don't have a tick logic, we will not tick the block entity. Although I may go against that, because I don't know, maybe you want to overwrite something for yourself. So I will have it. So let's add it. Then we have dot is tickable. Of course, if you don't set the tick logic, this will set the tickable. But if you have the tick logic, then you won't need this one, okay? And this needs to be tick, not tickable, something like that. So that is what we will add to the block entity properties. And of course, I will put two regions here, one for the set, one for the get, so that we know what we are doing here. And that will be in the next video. And after that video, we will jump to our Jiralib and into the block entity and block. First, we will handle the block with the changes that we had, because let's face it, lots of method calls is changed and this guy needs to fix them. Also, I need to handle the inventories breaking. Then we will fix this situation. We will have one single GBE and one single G screen BE, and that would be it. Each one of these classes will happen in their own videos from now on. If you like these videos, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and turn on that bell so that when I publish a new video, you will get informed. Have fun, everyone. Bye.